Hello again, people. This is another episode of my little reviewing free RPGs. So it's been a while since I've done one of those, and it's also going to be kind of a new thing. Kind of these two things are going to overlap a bit. Where I'm doing this new thing, it'll probably end up being basically the same as the free RPG thing, but I'm doing it anyway, separating it a little bit. Is that it's going to be part of a little series where I explore other post-apocalypse games because me doing the Fifth City, which is a post-apocalyptic game. I kind of want to explore other settings and get some ideas and talk about them. So I'll follow my little journey with you guys. Fifth City was based on New York Classic, which was based on Game World. It all goes back, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're going to talk about the free RPG, the World After, which, as a name, is actually both brilliant and incredibly stupid. I'm just gonna be honest here, but I actually kind of like the name. But it's I don't want to say bad. It's kind of interesting, stupid. If there's like an alignment for that, it kind of, well, to describe it simply put, is that if you watch the video connected to the drive-thru RPG, you kind of get instantly what they're going for. With the whole thing is that Waffle was created with diversity or something like that, and it definitely shows in the game. I'll just say that. And before someone says, "Oh, you're just being political," listen, I may not necessarily agree with every little bit of politics in the world, and I don't have to enjoy a setting. And I'm not gonna dox the game for it. If you want to have a setting, like if you remember my mermaid after the mermaid game I did or review I did, you'll see that I don't necessarily have to agree with everything they do in something on politics wise to enjoy a setting, as I do kind of like that setting. And the problem is it's a bit more prominent. I don't say prominent. It's that it's fine if you want to do that as a setting because might not be my cup of tea, but enjoy it. The problem is it doesn't make sense internally. It doesn't make sense as an internal logic, if that makes sense, or it doesn't really apply to the rules of reality. Kind of explain where that comes in later. But we should probably get into the world itself. This is probably going to end up being reviewing more of the world rather than the mechanics, but I will touch on the mechanics because this is a free RPG review. The world is set about 8,000 years after today, so quite a bit of time. Well, in the grand scheme of things, not too much, but still. Basically, humans messed up the environment big time. All the ice caps melted, which I don't know why these people always assume that all the ice caps melted would instantly destroy civilization, because humans started out when technically it's always been ice caps, but life has perfectly persisted long before ice caps. Having ice caps at all is actually unusual for the Earth. So realistically, there was no reason to suspect there'd be any great cataclysm if all the ice were to melt. Sure, some land would disappear, but in the grand scheme of things, that would be mostly forgotten. No one remembers Dodger Land after all. But that's irrelevant. It's a setting for a premise, and though I think it's cheesy climate activist stuff, it really doesn't matter. It's a setup for an apocalypse. I use, how am I saying a generic nuke or zombie? It doesn't matter. I don't care. It's a setup premise. It doesn't really bother me. It's perfectly fine. And then, blah blah blah, environmental crisis. You know how this goes. The only interesting thing that happens here is twofold. Is one, the whole magical super science essence shows up, which it's magic. Like, it's not really complaining, it's saying it's just basically mutagenic magic. It's like if you took radiation in most post-apocalypse games and put it in the middle of a bar between science fiction and fantasy, something like in Fifth City's their radiation, which is actually they know to be a cloud of nanomachines or engineered chemical type thing, will be on the hard science end of that meter. This would be on the hard other end of being basically magic. Either advanced clock tech kind of stuff where indistinguishable magic, or just straight magic essence. It's kind of hard. It also states it happened before at other points, like the Cambrian explosion. Kind of impressed I actually know about that. Oh, and also after the asteroid hit from the dinosaurs. Not exactly the best example of that, but whatever. But anyway, and then humans, the ones that didn't go into space, they kind of show up later. Y'all went to these bunkers, or at least all over the world at least. The game itself is actually set in this one particular place in England, which I'm gonna forget names. So if I put up it on the screen of something, assume that's what I'm talking about, because I'm an idiot and can't remember names to save my life. but you just have to forgive me there. That's a little part of Cape. I can't say the name. I can't remember the name. But the point is, on screen, this tiny part of England here, there were 9 of these bases, and at the point of the setting, only 5 actually made it through. And I'm more impressed that there are 9 bases of this tiny part of England. Like this kind of reminds me of the vaults from Fallout, and that analogy is going to become a lot more apt later. They're kind of similar to them in concept, except for presumably not made for being experiments. And so that happened. People went into the bunkers, or havens as they're called, and they kind of hid there for a few thousand years, and they mutated and adapted over time. And then by the point of the setting, they all come out of the haven, bunker, heavily defended areas to go explore the world and such. You know, that's a pretty good premise, all things considered. Coming out, it really is kind of similar to the premise of Fallout. And that's not I'm trying to say it's mocking or exactly the same or it's copying. It's just a similarity you can make as a comparison. Where the setting kind of has some issues is with their, I guess, races, or the havens, or the people who live in the havens. They all kind of, they're kind of weird, and not only in the way I noticed to say, like, oh, non-supporting, non-traditional, whatever. No, it's not that. They often have different issues that are often unrelated. Sometimes they're related, and I'll just go. But I'm also going to do this in reverse order. The book itself lists these as in reverse order. So it's not going to, so the setting game itself lists them in the opposite order I'm going to say them, because I like saving it for dramatic effect. Because I'm cheesy like that. First up, we have these guys, who I just like to call the dwarves. They aren't actually dwarves, but they kind of remind me of dwarves. I mean, like, I guess maybe the dwarves are up in Scotland. That's needed. And I don't have much to say on these guys. I truly don't. The whole stick is that unless I'm forgetting something here. I'm forgetting something a bit here, so, comment if you want. Now I could be forgetting something, but it kind of comes down to they used to live in this super strict hierarchy society where, like, you all had your caste and this, and there was slaves, and only certain people could worship the gods and such, and that kind of thing. And then recently in their history, they had a rebellion. They just became a bunch of free love, anarch, hippie types. It was kind of funny, is that it ends up making them a lot less interesting. Now, better society probably, but it ends up making them less interesting, especially when you see all the others. There's really not much to say on them, as they either come down to just being kind of boring, or their world will be better fit by literally just taking dwarves. Just insert dwarves here. You'd be better off that way. Like, if you entirely replaced their entire haven with just dwarves, you probably have a more interesting setting, to be honest. There's, really, nothing. They don't have anything bad against them, it's just nothing interesting. The second, or the fourth one, technically, is, once again, I forget the name, but they're basically the underwater ones. The haven was underwater. Not sure why they built it there. Maybe it's sunk, I don't know. And their whole stick is that they're kind of the aquatic, kind of advanced people. They live under a technocracy, which you do not see much in games or science fiction or anything like that, so it's kind of interesting to see a technocracy. It doesn't really factor in much, but kind of interesting. They're also supposedly, the whole thing is that their base was like, it kind of started leaking over time, like water started getting in because the base was just not designed to deal with that much time, and it just kind of seeped in, but they learned they could hold their breath for longer and longer until they just breathe underwater, which is kind of interesting, although I do imagine it was pretty bad for the people who didn't get those mutations, because I can imagine as a different setting where you have like a base slowly flooding up, like inevitable doom as you play the more human ones who can't breathe underwater. They have to slowly find a way to deal with the slowly sinking empire. That's a setting in its own right. That should be a setting. But that's regardless. And they're also, the book, it's like the cover book and such, so it says that they were made by people of color, which I don't know why they specify that. It does not factor into them at all. And, people of color is about as vague as saying the Avengers minus Captain America. It's not a very good descriptor of anything. It's just not a good descriptor. And it doesn't even use in a description. It's just used in the back of the book. Like, was this something they added later and just never put into the lore actually? Was it an early draft they just kind of dropped over time? I don't know. It really becomes irrelevant. But And one of the biggest stick as a society, not the technocracy, not the people of color, those are all supplemental. Although the breathing in the water thing is kind of important and cool. They want to integrate back with the service people, kind of. Is that they're the most technologically advanced. They have advanced technology. This is where the problem comes in. First thing, we never get a good idea of what the tech level of all the havens are. Like, I'm going to guess somewhere in Dark Age Europe levels, roughly. Because that seems to be about right, I'd say. But it's really uncertain. And the problem is, this becomes an extra big problem when you have these guys who are supposed to be so technologically advanced. So it's like, okay, you're more advanced than everyone else, but what does that actually mean? Because there's a big difference between if they're all Stone Age and they're like Iron Age, versus if they're all Iron Age and they're like Space Age. That changes the game entirely. And they really need to specify this. This comes down to a lack of proper world building. Even something as simple as, the Havens are tech level 3 and can build, insert this, why the Havens are tech level 5 or whatever, and they can do this. Something simple as that. They're just some rough ideas, like, they can produce stuff to the Dark Age, but they can produce up to 1950. Something like that would have helped. But overall, not a bad concept, just needed more fleshing out, really. The third one, they're kind of the dragon, scaly lizard bros, as you do. Their whole stick is that their haven got flooded with lava, the skin turned to scales, you know how this goes. And they're actually my favorite because they are actually internally interesting. Because they are interesting in their own right. They're a bunch of reptile dragon people with fire, they can control fire, some of them, but it's dangerous. And they have the 4 houses that all kind of do their own thing, but they all kind of work together, and they kind of squabble with each other, and they're very strict and orderly about the family. But they use it as an example, as that, like, you know, many marriages are arranged, but if you have a true love or something like that as an example, you might have to duel someone for the right to, you know, marry and marry who you want and other things like that. It's very fascinating. It's actually, despite its limited page count, interesting. I find it interesting. It is slightly hurt by the fact that all the houses are ruled by basically immortal liches, and they have some control over all the citizens. It's not exactly stated. I think that hurts the setting. Should be noble families or something. Should be something like that. Would have made it a lot better. But you have this whole concept of noble dueling and honor and strict family hierarchies. Like, you can do stuff like that. That is interesting in its own right. And that's the thing. All these havens were cut off each other for thousands of years. So each one should, in its own right, be interesting and can tell stories on its own. And these guys can. They aren't like the height of world building or anything, but they are actually fun. I could, like, take just them and tell a story with them. I can make people play the characters and we'll have fun. So I support them in that. These guys are good. The second to last ones, these guys, they're not terribly interesting. I'm just gonna be honest. Like, you're a bunch of plant people that hang out in caves. That's nice. Nice. Would have been nice if they looked a little more interesting. They have this weird thing that's supposed to be partially a matriarchy, but they also can't really tell the difference between guys and girls. Kind of odd that you build your society around something you can barely tell the difference of, but whatever. They're not terribly interesting. They all raise their kids' community, which will come up again in a second. They kind of anarchic. They have like the elders and such like that, and the most interesting thing they actually have is ritual cannibalism of the dead, which will come up in a second, I assure you. They're just not terribly interesting. There isn't a lot to say about them. Like, okay, that's nice. Good to see you. You're there, I guess. This is like the NPC race that, like, one person really wants to play, but yet no one else will actually play. It's like a tortoise. Who wants to play it? Well, if tortoise didn't have a broken AC ability. Kind of thing. And then we get the big one. I suspect these guys are supposed to be the default ones. And I have beef with these guys. And not for the reason you think. You might think you know my beef with them. But I assure you, my beef is different. It's not about what you think it's going to be. Trust me, it's going to be fun. And by fun, I mean slightly annoying. They are my least favorite of all of them. Because they actively veer into annoying territory. So their whole stick is that their haven broke. Like, all the electronics broke, and they couldn't heat themselves up. I'm not sure how cold England gets inside a metal box from the ground, so I don't know. That could easily happen. I won't judge them for it, but their power went out. It was all cold. They had to survive in the cold. Kind of interesting. And then all the guys in the thing died. I Don't know how that happens. Like, how does basically one half of your population die like that? That'd be like all the brown-haired people, brown-eyed dying. It doesn't make sense, really. But, like, all of them. Not just most of them, all of them. And either A, the population was so incredibly small that could happen, or B, something specifically killed all the guys. I don't know why. Like, just, it confuses me. Like, and if it's small enough that could reasonably happen, wouldn't inbreeding become a massive issue since they were isolated? Yeah, I'm probably thinking too much on that one. Basically, all the male-identifying ones started turning into guys, which isn't actually realistic. It might be a clownfish type thing, now I think about it. But basically, the whole stick is that every moon or full lunar cycle, I'm not entirely sure if it's actually tied to the moon or just a coincidence, but they can change the gender from, like, male, female, intersex, whatever that means. You mean? And you think that's what I'm mad about them? It isn't. The only real question I have about it is that what happens if someone changes the gender when they're pregnant? Like, that's the one question I have about that. Because quite frankly, I don't care about it. I have bigger beef with them. The thing I actually get mad about them about, or just their inconsistent logic, is that they're probably the closest to normal, I'd say, normal humans. But they have this whole, they live in these very tribal, anarchist communities, a running theme in the setting, and they are just annoying. Like, I'm gonna give my I have 2 big points against these people. I'm gonna give the small one first. My first big point I really have against them is that they all live, like, they all raise their kids cumulatively, which already would imply issues. But if the birth parents, like the biological parents, show too much connection to them, that they, in my opinion, they just act like a parent would to their kid, you know, even an adopted parent would, they'll be sent away from their tribe for 50 moons or 50 months or over 2 years, so they lose that connection. What? Like, just to be clear, they're not the villains. They're not the villains of the setting or jerks or flawed. They're portrayed as the good guys. Think about that. Just why? Just of all the psychological issues and issues they would have, it's not portrayed as a bad thing. If it was portrayed as a bad thing, it would at least, you know, like, oh, they're bad for it. But does anyone actually support that policy? But whatever. But my big point against them, my biggest point, the thing I just almost hate them for to some degree, is just one little thing here. You see, they have communal property. They don't believe much in personal space or personal belonging, that kind of thing. It's common in these stories, not very common in real-life cultures, but whatever. You know, they all believe in communal property, communal stuff, don't have a concept of personal privacy. It doesn't even make sense in relationships. They actively discourage monogamy because, you know, that couldn't go poorly. But whatever. I guess true love doesn't really exist among them very well. You know, that kind of thing, all free love, that kind of stuff. But, they have communal property, okay? But they are known to be traders. Not traders, merchants. They sell and buy things. They give stuff, you know, they trade. They're traders. They give stuff to other people in exchange for goods. The problem is, to trade, you need to have stuff to trade. You need to own the thing you're trading for. It's like, you know, like, I can sell you everything in my briefcase, or can at least attempt to, or be willing to sell you stuff, but I have to own what's in the briefcase first to sell it, otherwise you could just grab it and run away with it. Like, and that wouldn't be stealing. Like, that alone, like, you have to have a concept of personal ownership to be able to trade things like that. It's like barter 101. I have the apples, you have the fish, I will give you apples for fish. It's bartering, it's the barter system 101, people. How did you forget this? How? This is a logical incontinuity. This goes beyond stupidity. This is literally contradicting stuff. They are actively contradicting themselves, either in lore or in its saying itself. Like, do you have a concept of property? Because then you have property rights. You don't have your whole no one owns anything, because you'd be able to trade. But if you do have the communal property, then you can't be a bunch of people who merchants and trading, because you don't own things to trade. I'm sorry. That just annoys me. It's annoying. But anyway, I'm going to temporarily veer off from the lore for a moment to then focus on the mechanics of the game just a little bit, because I'm not talking about anything remarkable. But I should, so I don't start raging too much. The mechanics are okay. They're D6. You roll dice. How many success you get depends on how difficult the check is. Kind of World of Darkness-y. Well, not. Yeah, kind of World of Darkness-y. That kind of thing. You've seen it before. D6 stuff. What's interesting is the class equivalent has a cool flowchart, and though there isn't as much customization I was necessarily like in certain places, there isn't a proper skill system. There really should be, in my opinion. Not really. But it's kind of interesting, the flow chart, how they all go. I mean, the only complaint really against it is, A, there should be more options, but, duh. And second thing, I don't like how most of the classes kind of boil down to the final endpoint. There isn't a lot of choice in the final endpoint. Kind of disappointing, to be honest. The weapons are kind of annoying, how they just give, very basic +1s and end up having a lot of weapons that you think do more, how a laser pistol only does, one more to, a bow would do. Just, I would think that'd be different. A little bit extreme or different. That's the difference between, just some flaws like that, things I don't like. It's just needs some passion out, but the system itself is okay. It's not bad. Works perfectly fine. Okay, now we're done talking about mechanics. Time to get back into the lore, because I'm done with the Havens, but I have more beef. Well, more overall. So these 5 groups are portrayed as being 100% cooperative and working together often. Why? Has anything in human history ever taught you that people will not always go collaboratively? I like to believe that people can work together, but I also know reality. And that's not always the case, and wars have been fought over a lot stupider things than what these people would fight over. And how do I know this? Because we once fought a war over a pig. No, really, that's an actual war that actually happened. Look it up. The pig war actually occurred. The war with the emus, that actually happened. We fought a lot of stupid wars over incredibly stupid reasons. So I have no reason to, just think about all the wars England and France have fought against each other, or Spain, or Germany, anyway. Think, as Europeans as examples. All the wars they fought, all the named wars you can look up in a book, think of how all they fought, but realistically, especially some of them, were very similar. They were all the same species. All humans were the same species, but, were all the same species. All the Europeans, just once again, using Europe as an example, had the same culture, had the same society, were always interlinked. They were descendants of Rome, kind of. They all had the same connection. They had a common religion, a common faith. They had a lot of things in common, and those people fought all the time. They had a lot of things in common, still fought. There is no reason to suspect these Havens, who have almost nothing in common, except maybe somewhat a common origin, if they truly know that, would not be fighting each other. They don't really have a strong common foe, and they have plenty of reasons to get mad at each other. After all, most groups in human society ever would say cannibalism is wrong regardless of circumstance. Most, there are exceptions, but a lot would. So there's no reason to suspect that the Havens, the other 4 Havens, wouldn't gang up on the second one, or at least as some kind of not like them or want to deal with them because they are cannibals. Most societies generally eschew that, or at the very least do not wish to associate with cannibals. Just saying. And then you have, once again, to the first group, the ones that I despise, those guys, they have no concept of personal property. They just don't believe in that. That can cause issues easily, because if you happen to, say, walk into a village of any of the other tribes, of Havens, and you take some of their stuff because you think it's communal, then you have just committed stealing. If someone walks into any modern civilization today and takes a bunch of stuff from a store, they're not taking communal property, that's stealing. And there's no implication. The other society, the Havens, don't have a concept of stealing. So then the police are going to bust down your door, or at least hunt you down. Someone's going to be looking for you. And then that can easily cause conflict between the two, or at least some kind of residual aggression. And the simple fact, they look different from each other. I know that's cheesy, but they have plenty of differences, subtle and obvious, that would at the very least cause some tension, or something, or at the very least unusual. And you might say, well, they're not racist. It's not about racism. It's like if a bunch of dragon-looking people came out of the mountains one day, your initial reaction probably would have some slightly negative connotations. Not out of the ground of you being racist or anything, just on the ground of, something that doesn't look normal came out of the ground. it would help somewhat if all 5 havens had some kind of common enemy they would all rally against. And it was like, oh yes, we used to fight or something, or we used to not get along, but then, then insert the Fire Nation or whatever attacked, and we must unite against them. Because it turns out the greatest way to get 2 people to work together is to get them a common enemy. But that's beyond the point. That's just... And you have the Cryorg, the corporation that hang out on the moon and Mars. You think a civilization that technologically advanced would be a bigger deal, but they aren't. They really don't play a big deal. Like, they just show up in the Monster Manual. They're kind of there. They're implied to be kind of thing, but they aren't. And it's just... And yeah, and the Monster Manual is actually not bad. They have some cool monster ideas, but it really just comes down... Oh, and I have another question. So if this one tiny part of England has, like, 9 havens made for it, and though 4 of them died, still that's 9 or 5. So the success rate is around 50%, I'd say, from a haven. Where are all the others? Like, think about it. If there were 9 havens in this small region, if that amount is even remotely comparable to the rest of the world, or even just England, there were going to be a lot more than just 5 people groups running around. There was going to be armies. Like, it's not even just going to be as simple as, oh, these are the American haven, or this is the Scottish haven. This is going to be like, this is clan insert something, and there's clan insert something, and there's clan insert something, and they're all Scottish. And not even all Scottish, they're all Western Scottish, because there's havens over there, too, in all the other different regions. In Rampage, you don't even know. There's going to be all over the place. This isn't going to be, they're the 5 remaining. This is going to be swarming very quickly, and they're saying, like, I'm kind of shocked they haven't met anyone else to this point. There should be entire groups meeting them. There should mean people from London, or people from Wales, maybe people from Ireland, or even on the European mainland, like France or Germany or the Nordic countries, the new Viking invasion, or even Americans showing up again, trying to figure out what happened to England. You would have all these things happening, and there's no implication to believe it shouldn't be happening. So I wonder where and why. You know what I mean? Like, you can, like, yeah, okay, I think I'm done for now. But yeah, it's not really bad. It's not like and I know I've been complaining a bit. By a bit, I mean a lot, but it's not the worst setting ever. It's not super enraging or anything. I myself can name worse RPGs easily. It's just kind of there. It's not even really the politics. You might think it's my complaint against the politics of what turning off. It's not. It's that the world just doesn't end up being interesting. It doesn't end up being interesting. The havens don't always make sense. They either come out to be annoying or boring. The one of them that has any kind of potential is kind of muttered by the fact that they don't necessarily have total free will, and the politics aren't as gripping as it could be. And just a lot of inconsistency like that. Like, a second edition would really help them out. Like, a second edition where they can rewrite some of the lore, fix it a bit, maybe. I would spread it out against England a bit, because quite frankly, if this one tiny place has that many bases, there's gonna be all over the place, and someone's going to be doing really well and come over to you as like a new empire or something. I would spread it out a bit, not just this one area of England anymore. Spread it out to at least the rest of England proper, and maybe the British Isles. You know, I'd spread it out a bit. Better that way for at least explaining how there isn't everyone else. But I don't know. It's not the worst thing in the world. If you're willing to put in some elbow grease, fix up the mechanics, fix up the lore, probably you remove the first one from existence, the first haven, because they're just so stupid. It's like, why? You can't trade your own property. But yeah. Hope you enjoy my little review, even though it's maybe closer to a rant. Hopefully the next free RPG video I will be doing is a better RPG I liked a bit more. I don't know. Might come down to it. I'm not sure if the next of this series will be related to that, or will be related to the post-virus thing, which might not be the same thing. But hey, you got any suggestions for RPGs, like free RPGs or post-apocalyptic games you're going to review or talk about? Drop them in the comments. I love that. I love when people do that. Gives me ideas. And yeah, see you next time.